So our circulatory system, it's composed of our heart, our blood vessels, and blood. Okay, and I'm sure most of you know that already. And the whole point of our circulatory system is to deliver food and oxygen to the different parts of the body. Why do we need oxygen? Well, our cells need that for respiration. Okay, so we need oxygen in order for our cells to respire, and respiration produces energy. Okay, and that energy again is used for all of their function. And food, need food, obviously very important, because it makes structures, so it's important for growth and the maintenance of our structures in our body. Okay, so that's the main point of our circulatory system, to deliver food and oxygen to the various cells of the body. But also we have the circulatory system is an exchange system, so it also removes waste from those cells. So what waste could they producing? Well, for example, cells produce carbon dioxide from respiration. So that's a waste product. And if too much CO2 builds up in those cells and in the blood, then that can again cause all sorts of problems for the body. Okay, so the circulatory system, its job is to provide oxygen and nutrients as well as removing waste. Now, our circulatory system is very special because it's a double circulatory system. I'm going to explain to you on the next slide exactly what that means. You might not be entirely sure, but basically it means that the heart, the blood is pumped through our heart twice before it goes back out to the body. So it's two circuits joined together in one. And again, don't worry if you're confused, I'm going to draw it out for you on the next slide. And each component of our circulatory system is specially adapted to its function. And we're going to look at all of those components one by one and see how they're specifically adapted to carry out its function. So if you just look over to this diagram here, you can see we have our heart, we have a left side of the heart and a right side that can pump blood to the lungs and to the body. Okay, so let's have a look a little bit more in detail at the double circulatory system. So we have our heart here in the middle. Deoxygenated blood from the body goes to the lungs. Okay, so the blue bit symbolises the deoxygenated route of blood, and then that blood is oxygenated and taken back to the heart. Okay. Now, this side of the double circulatory system is referred to as the pulmonary circulation because it goes, blood is pumped from the right ventricle to the lungs where it can be oxygenated. Okay, so once that blood has been oxygenated, it can then be pumped to the rest of the body. So that is pumped through the left side of the heart to the body. Okay, and then the blood can return back to the heart, and this is deoxygenated. So this side of the circulation is called the systemic circulation. Okay, so can you see what I mean by there's two circuits? You've got one circuit, which is the pulmonary circulation, and the other circuit, which is the systemic circulation, which involves pumping blood to the body, and the other one is pumping blood to the lungs and goes back via the heart. So together, okay, this makes a double circulatory system. I hope that's clear, but if it's not clear, then I'll just give you a comparison. So if we had a single circulatory system, what we would have is, let me just write heart, and you would have deoxygenated blood going to the lungs, just like you have in a double circulatory system, but then this blood is pumped directly to the body. Okay, and then that would be, so this is an example of a single circulatory system, because blood doesn't go through the heart twice. Can you see it's only one circuit? It goes from the heart to the lungs and then directly to the body. There's no blood being pumped back towards the heart. Okay, so when blood is pumped directly from the gas exchange organ to the body, that's known as a single circulatory system. And for example, this is what's found in fish. Okay, so our circulatory system is much more efficient than that. The heart then itself, so I'm sure you know the heart is an organ, and it's one of the main organs in the body. I think if you ask anybody, you know, what the heart, where the heart is and what the heart does, they know the answer to that. And so the heart's an organ, but we want a specific, you know, biological definition for this. So the definition of an organ is a collection of tissues that carry out a specific function. Okay, and so the specific function of the heart is to act as a pump. It's supposed to act as a pump to pump blood around the body and distribute it. Okay, so that's its specialized function, to keep blood flowing around the body. The walls of the heart are mainly composed of muscle tissue, and the reason why that is because muscle can contract and relax. Okay, so in order to have a pump, we need something that's able to generate force and able to squeeze things. Okay, that's what a pump is, isn't it? It's essentially pushing down on something. It creates a force, all this pressure, and it forces something out. So muscle is really good for that. Muscle can contract and relax. Okay, so the whole heart is a muscular structure, and it's actually, so the muscle of a heart is actually referred to as the myocardium. And these are made up of cardiac myocytes, which means cardiac muscle cells, and these cardiac muscle cells contract in a regular way to cause blood to be pumped through the entirety of the heart and then eventually to the body. Okay, so it's a very special organ. And what's also special about our heart is the fact that it is myogenic. So I don't know if you've heard that term before, but myogenic basically means the heart beats by itself. So we're going to look a bit in the session a bit later. We'll see how the heart does that. But basically what it means is that the heart can initiate its own heartbeat. It can contract without being told to do so. So we have nerves all over our body telling us, you know, what to do. This is a completely, you know, involuntary movement, and the heart can beat by itself. So it's a very, very special organ. And the last thing that I want to say about the heart is, so basically these heart muscles have to move in sync. They've got to contract in a regular way, but the arrangement of those cells is again linked to their function. So those cells are arranged in such a way that it allows the whole heart to, when it contracts and pumps blood, it completely twists. It twists and squeezes all of that blood out. So what I want you to picture is, can you think of a really like wet towel or a flannel, right? And you want to try and drain and you know, wring out as much water as you can to dry it off. If you just pull on that wet towel, okay, just pull on it horizontally, okay, then you're not going to get much water coming out. But if you grab hold of that towel and you twist it and squeeze it and really wring it, you get much more water coming out. And that is exactly what the heart does. Okay, it completely twists when it contracts, and it squeezes all that blood to get it going around the body. So we're now going to have a quick look at a video of a real heart contracting in situ, which means, you know, in its place of origin in the body. So I'm sorry if some of you are a bit squeamish. not a great sign if you want to be doctors, but don't worry, you get used to it. So I just thought it'd be quite cool for you to actually see the heart working as a pump, and you can see the muscle really, you know, contracting and squeezing all that blood out. So let's have a look. Oh, I just need to switch to this. So can you see how much force that generates? It's really pumping ever so hard. Okay, you can't really see it twisting as such. That's all done internally, but from the outside you can see that it's really working ever so hard to pump all that blood around the body. I'll just play it to you one more time. Okay, so notice it, you know, really contracting with some force to pump blood throughout the body. So I think it's really cool, to be honest. Right, okay, let's move on. So the anatomy of the heart. So where is your heart? I'm sure you know where your heart is. So it's basically pretty central, but it stoops down to the left because of the bottom of the heart. So I'm just going to move this out of the way so I can label it. So this bit here, okay, is the bottom of the heart, and this is known as the apex. Okay, and the apex swoops towards the left side of our body, so that's why the heart is kind of positioned. It's central, but it's slightly to the left. Okay, and when you ask someone to think of, you know, how big is your heart, I think most people will tell you, oh, it's the size of a clenched fist. And that's not strictly true, because, you know, I can tell you from going into the dissection room at uni and looking at real hearts, they're much bigger than the size of a clenched fist. But, you know, a rough estimate, we say size of a clenched fist, but actually in real life, it's slightly bigger. OK, so, yeah, it will amaze you when you get to see it in real life. And so before we go any further, I just want to get to grips with our lefts and rights, and I want to just explain to you what I mean by that. So if you look at this stick man here, okay, just circle him. So you'll notice that the right side of his body is over here, which is on our left, and his left is on our right. So when we refer to left and right, we're referring to a person's left or right, okay? So his right side of the body, we're looking at it from our left, okay? It's on our left, and his left side of the body is on our right. I hope that makes sense, yeah? So please don't get confused, okay? Remember, the right side of the heart and left side of the heart, it's that person's left and right, not ours, yeah? Okay, so this is a quick diagram of the heart. We're going to look through all these structures properly one by one, but I just want to highlight these. So we have the left atrium and the left ventricle. So this is the left side of the heart, and this is the left atrium. It is the first chamber of the heart where blood is received from the lungs, okay, and this is oxygenated blood. So this is the atrium, and then it's pumped through into the ventricle going via these valves here, and then that blood can be ejected up here through the aorta, okay? And similarly, on the right, we have exactly the same chambers, but just on the right side of the heart. So you've got a right atrium and a right ventricle. The blood from the right atrium comes from the body, and this is deoxygenated blood, goes to the right ventricle and then back out through the pulmonary arteries, where the blood can be oxygenated in the lungs, okay? So I just want to, you know, emphasize that we're going to look through these one by one in turn. So if that was a lot to take in, don't worry, because we're going to go through them slowly. Right, okay, so there's lots of different blood vessels in the body. We've got three main categories. We have arteries, veins, and capillaries. And again, we're going to look at these one by one in turn. And, you know, we have these vessels in order to transport blood, and their structures relate to their function. So we're going to have a look at them in a bit more detail. So this is an illustration of the network of blood vessels that you will see in the body. So you'll see that we have arteries, and we have capillaries, and we have veins, okay? And those are the main ones you need to know about. But you'll see on this diagram we have two additional ones called venules and arterioles, and I'm just going to explain to you a little bit about their importance and what they do. But remember, an artery carries oxygenated blood, and an artery takes blood away from the heart, okay? And the easiest way to remember that is there's an A in artery and an A in away, okay? So remember that an artery takes blood away from the heart, and veins do the opposite, okay? So veins take blood to the heart. It doesn't work quite as well with veins, because obviously you know, V and T are two different letters, but just remember that veins do the opposite of what arteries do, and if you can remember the function of an artery, you can remember the function of a vein, okay? So arteries take oxygenated blood away from the heart, and it's transported to these things called capillaries. Now, capillaries are they're our finest and smallest vessel in the body, and the whole point of them is to exchange the blood with the different cells and tissues and organs, okay? So they can bring the blood in such close proximity to those structures so it can maximize the rate of diffusion of those different products, okay? But in order for the blood to get from an artery to a capillary, it's got to go through something called an arteriole. So an arteriole is a small artery, okay? So what I want you to think of is, so imagine like this is an artery and this is a capillary. So that's obviously, there's a really big difference in size. So imagine we'd have so much blood in this artery because it's bigger, and it's got to get all the way in that tiny capillary. How are we going to do that? Well, we have things called arterioles, which basically they kind of act as a bridge, if you like, and they get smaller. They get smaller, where they can actually take all of that blood from the artery, and it becomes a much smaller structure, and so it can all fit into that capillary. Okay, so this would be the arteriole. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So it basically means, yeah, that it allows the blood to reach the capillaries essentially. And the opposite is true for venules. So venules are exactly the same. So remember, blood is coming from these capillaries into the veins, and the veins are taking blood back to the heart. Okay, so you're going to, instead of going from a big structure to a small structure, regarding venules, you're going from a small structure to a big structure, okay? So that would be the venule. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Okay, so this is the network that you would see inside a body, but don't worry about arterioles and venules as much. I didn't label that as small vein, did I? So yeah, don't worry too much. I just thought I would make you aware that this is actually what goes inside the body, but you just need to be aware of these three main vessels: veins, capillaries, and arteries. Okay, so this is those three vessels that I was talking about. You'll notice actually on a few of these slides that there's quite a few spelling mistakes, so I apologise. I didn't actually make them, but in future we'll make sure that they're all corrected, but I'm sure you'll be able to work out what we're trying to say. So I'm sure you can see from here that the vessels look quite different, and you need to be able to tell the difference between those vessels in terms of how their structures differ. And we're going to go through those one by one. So arteries. So arteries, remember I told you arteries take blood away from the heart, okay? That's their main function. And because they're taking blood away from the heart and they've got to deliver it to the rest of the body, they have to deliver that under high pressure. Okay, you want it under high pressure in order to make sure that blood can travel fast and reach every cell. Okay, so that's why it's under high pressure. Okay, and also gravity helps with that, because obviously arteries are taking blood away from the heart. So if it's below the heart, then gravity will help with that. So yeah, blood needs to be under high pressure when it's going through arteries, and the way it maintains a high pressure is related to its function. Okay, so what you'll be able to see is we have 3 layers to an artery. We have an inner layer. Okay, I'm sorry that the writing is quite small on here, but I'll just point it out to you. So we have this inner layer here. Okay, so where my pen is, that's the inner layer, and this is sometimes known as the intima. That's the Latin name. Then we have this middle layer, okay, and then you'll notice that that's quite a thick layer, and that's made up of muscle cells, smooth muscle cells, okay, and this is called the media. And we finally have an outer layer, which is a little bit thinner than the middle layer, but a bit thicker than the inner layer, and this is known as the adventitia. Okay, so middle layer is made up of muscle cells, and the outer layer is made up of collagen, which allows the artery to kind of stretch, if you like, and it gives it strength as well. Okay, so muscle cells, we have muscle cells because remember, muscles can contract and relax. So if we've got muscle cells, that means that the blood vessels can actually, when we're referring to vessels, instead of saying contract, we say constrict. So blood vessels can constrict, and let's say we'll say relax. Okay, and if they can constrict and relax, that means it can control the rate of blood flow. Yeah. So if you have a really narrow artery, you're not going to get much blood flowing. But if you've got, you know, a more relaxed artery, you'll have more blood flowing through. Yeah. Okay. So we've got muscle cells to give strength and to control the rate of blood flow, and we have an outer layer, this adventitia, to make it stretch and to recoil. Okay, and also it's worth noting that the whole of the tube is called the lumen. So this thing in the middle is called the lumen. Okay, and you'll notice that there are differences in the sizes of the lumen when we look at veins. All right, so on to capillaries now. So I told you capillaries are the smallest and finest of our blood vessels. So their whole job is to carry, you know, blood very close to the cells and to make sure it gets to those, you know, cells in close proximity to allow diffusion of things like oxygen and nutrients. Okay, and the way that it's structured is it's 1 cell thick. Okay, 1 cell thick means a shorter diffusion distance. Shorter diffusion distance, which means faster diffusion. Okay, so it allows for efficient transfer of oxygen nutrients to the cells, and that's the same for carbon dioxide, because remember, we have to get rid of the waste that cells produce, and so whilst the oxygen and nutrients diffuse out of the capillaries, we've got carbon dioxide and waste coming from cells, okay, coming from cells going into the capillaries, okay, and this is going to cells. Okay, So yeah, they're very, very thin, tiny vessels. We actually use this clinically. So we use something called, let me write it here for you. We use something called capillary refill time. Okay, so we use that as a measure of looking at how well your blood is flowing around the body and if it's reaching, you know, all of its structures. So the way we do that is we take your finger, for example. So if you hold your index finger out in front of you and you press down on that with your thumb, and what you're doing is you're basically pushing down on those blood vessels, so you're stopping blood flowing through them. So you'll notice that when you push down on your index finger with your thumb, it goes kind of white. And then what we do is we release the thumb and we time how long it takes for your index finger to go back to that red color, so going from, you know, white to red. And we say a healthy capillary refill time is 2 seconds. So if it takes a bit longer for your finger to go back to that red color, then we say that you're having issues with perfusion, and there's something not quite right there. So that just shows you how we use the function of capillaries to measure how well your blood is flowing through the body, and how we use that as a clinical measurement. Right, so on to veins. So remember I told you veins take blood back to the heart, okay? They take blood back to the heart, and it's at a much lower pressure, okay? It's at a much lower pressure than it is in arteries. And the way that it has a lower pressure is because it's got thinner layers. So you'll notice that the muscle layer, so this middle layer, is very thin compared to arteries, okay? So it's got a very thin muscle layer. Because it has that very thin muscle layer, it means it has a larger lumen than arteries, okay? So we're always comparing, the structures, the different vessels to each other in terms of structures. So blood is at a lower pressure in veins because it's got thinner, a thinner muscular layer, okay, and a larger lumen, so blood's at a much lower pressure. And the reason why it's larger is because veins hold the most amount of blood, okay? They want to take as much blood as they can back to the heart. So they hold about 70 to 80% of the total blood in our body, okay? And they're sometimes referred to as capacitance vessels because they have the capacity to hold a lot more blood than arteries do, yeah? Because we want as much blood as we can to be oxygenated so it can be delivered to tissues, if that makes sense. One last thing that I want to say about veins is that we have valves in veins. So we don't have valves in arteries, but we do have valves in veins. So valves open and close. Again, I'm sorry that it's quite small. So these valves open and close in order to control the flow of blood. So valves keep blood flowing. Oops, I've gone too fast. Valves keep blood flowing in the right direction, okay? So when the valves open, blood flows past, okay? But then they close, yeah? They close here, and so blood can't escape back. And that's important because obviously veins are taking blood to the heart, and so they're working against gravity, okay? So they really need to keep blood flowing in one direction. So it's really important that they do that, okay? So this is just on a side note. So you may have had a blood test done before, and you should know what that involves. And that usually involves tying this rubber band, if you like, large rubber band round your arm, just above your elbow, so we can see the veins more clearly. Okay, and So we tie that round and then we try and find a good vein. And if we can't find a good vein, what we do is we ask you to make a fist and give your hand a squeeze, and that will get blood flowing through the veins, and that will make them kind of bulge. So if we can see your veins bulging, then that's a good thing. It makes it more easier for us to gain access to that vein and take blood. Okay, and if you run your fingers over a vein that's where you've applied the tourniquet, so this thing is called the tourniquet, okay, you should be able to see that it kind of feels a bit spongy and a bit raised, and that's a good sign, okay. So that we do that when we're taking blood, and the act of taking blood from a vein is called venipuncture, okay. Right. So that's a summary of the vessels. So we've gone through arteries, capillaries and veins, and we've talked about how they have different structures. So remember, arteries carry blood, at a high pressure, veins at a lower pressure, and capillaries is where, exchange takes place between the cells. Oxygen diffuses out and carbon dioxide diffuses in, okay? And remember, valves are in veins to keep blood flowing in one direction. Okay, so again, this is quite an important table because it's a visual comparison of the different structures. So this comes up time and time again in exam questions. So always remember, arteries would have a thicker wall, muscular layer, okay, and they would have a smaller lumen compared to veins, which have a larger lumen and a thin wall. Yeah, and you should be able to easily spot which one is the capillary. Okay, so we've now looked broadly at blood vessels, but we're now going to look at some specific types of blood vessels that are important in terms of circulation and distributing blood. So we're going to go through these now. One by one. Let me just have a quick drink of water. Okay, so the vena cava. So the vena cava is the main vein of the body. So this is the main vein of our body. So it's taking blood from everywhere in the body to back to the heart, and this is carrying deoxygenated blood. And you'll see here that we have a superior end and we have an inferior end. So I'll just draw that here for you quickly. Okay, so this is the superior end and this is the inferior end. So superior refers to anything that is coming above something, and inferior refers to anything that's coming below something. And that something that we're referring to is the heart, okay? So anything above the heart, like the head, for example, the blood will be returned via the superior end of the vena cava, okay? So drains blood from above the heart. And you should work out, you should be able to work out what the inferior end does then. So it drains blood from below the heart. So above the heart, like I said, it might be from structures like the head and neck, for example, and structures below the heart, it might be your abdomen and legs, okay? So blood would go into the vena cava, okay, and then empty into the right atrium, okay? So we're now going to look at the pulmonary arteries, okay? Again, there's a spelling mistake on this slide, but it should say pulmonary artery, okay? So we have two pulmonary arteries. We have a left and a right because we have two lungs, a left and a right lung. So this pulmonary artery is taking blood to the right lung, and this is taking blood to the left lung, okay? So remember, two pulmonary arteries, one per lung. And So blood travels from that right atrium after it's been emptied by the vena cava into the right ventricle via this thing called the tricuspid valve. Okay, we're going to talk specifically about valves a bit later on. Okay, but just remember that atrium to ventricle, there's a valve called the tricuspid. So that valve opens when the atrium contracts to force blood through into the ventricle, and then that blood is ejected via these pulmonary arteries. Okay. It's worth noting as well that this artery is unique because it's the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood. What we've previously thought and looked at is arteries just carrying oxygenated blood, okay? But because this is an artery, it takes blood away from the heart, okay? It takes blood away from the heart to the lungs, and it's taking that blood to the heart, to the lungs in order to be oxygenated. So this blood has to be deoxygenated. Do you see that? So yeah, so just bear in mind this is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood, so it can be oxygenated in the lungs. Right, okay, so the pulmonary vein now. So we have 4 pulmonary veins, okay? So we've got 2 coming from each lung. So 2 from the right lung and 2 from the left lung. Okay, so it's slightly different to pulmonary artery where we had 1 per lung, we now have 2 per lung. Okay, so these veins empty into the left atrium. Okay, and this is taking blood from the lungs. Okay, it's returning blood from the lungs to the heart. Okay, and again, like the artery, pulmonary artery is an exception to the rule for arteries. This vein is an exception to the rule for veins because it carries oxygenated blood. Okay, because that blood has been oxygenated in the lungs, it's being returned to the left atrium where it can then be emptied into the ventricle and then out through the aorta. Okay, so the aorta then, so this is the main artery of the body. Main artery of the body. Okay, and blood from the left ventricle, okay, after the left atrium is contracted with that oxygenated blood and it flows into the left ventricle, the blood is then ejected through the aorta, okay, and it travels through like that. And we have a few more valves involved. Again, I haven't really pointed those out because I'm going to go through them in detail a bit later on, but the valve that's between the left atrium and the left ventricle is called the mitral valve, sometimes called the bicuspid. And the valve between the left ventricle and the aorta, this one here, oops, what have I done? Sorry. This one is called the aortic valve, okay? So again, don't worry too much about valves because we're going to go through them properly. So blood's ejected from the left ventricle up the aorta, and then that's distributed to the rest of the body. Now, it's carrying blood under very high pressure, and that's why we have a thicker left side of the heart. It's got more of a muscular layer, okay? Thicker muscular wall, let's say, okay? In order to generate that high pressure. And you'll notice at the top of this loop of the aorta, we have these, that's highlighted in yellow, we have these 3 branches that branch off the top of the aorta. And that is carrying blood to structures above the heart, okay? Above the heart, like your arms, for example, and your head, okay? Okay, so that's a lot to take in. So yeah, did you see what I mean when I said it's a very, heavy session this morning? So it's a lot to take in. So now I'm just going to give you a little analogy to help you remember blood flow through the heart. I'm not talking about the entire process. I'm just talking about the direction in which blood moves. Okay. So I want you to bear in mind that blood flows through, the atrium and ventricle via valves, and that's all due to pressure. So I hope that this analogy will make things clearer. So I want you to imagine that it's the morning of Boxing Day sales. And so if you guys know what Boxing Day is like, it is chaos, because there's all these, reductions in prices for different items, and people want to get those bargains. So, people go really early in the morning to queue up so they can be the first into those shops and really take advantage of all those sales. Okay, so imagine it's Boxing Day. All these people are queuing outside of the shops, ready for the doors to open. So I want you to imagine that the people queuing is the blood, okay? And the outside where they're queuing is the atrium, and they want to get into the shop, okay? And the shop is the ventricle. You'll see where I'm going with this. It might sound a bit weird, but I hope it makes sense by the end. Okay, so more people are joining the queues now. It's getting closer to opening time, so more people are joining, and they're putting pressure on those shops to open their doors. So now that there's a large number of people in the queue, imagine that this is pressure of blood building up in the atrium. Remember I said that the people are the blood, and so there's loads of people joining this queue now, and there's pressure building up inside that atrium. And they want to get into the shop, which is the ventricle. But remember, to get into the shop, you've got to go via doors. And just like in the heart, you've got to go via something in order to get into the next chamber. And so we have valves. So the doors in this example are the valves. Okay. Right. So there's just so many people outside now that the shops can't hold them back for much longer. It's just, they're just going crazy out there. They want to be let in. And so they're like, okay, right, let's open our doors now. So they open their doors and let them in. And then once they're at full capacity, they shut their doors to stop more people coming in. Okay. So again, because there's so many people outside now, it results in the shops opening, and this is equivalent to pressure in the blood being so high in the atrium, it results in them contracting, okay? And this forces the valves to open. So the doors opening is the valves opening, and then once, all that blood has rushed in, the valves shut to stop it going back up into the atrium. And this is the equivalent of the doors closing to stop more people coming into the shops, yeah? Okay, right, so finally, the shop just gets so busy and it's just crammed with, all these people, which makes it so much harder for them to move about in the shop. So they eventually leave and exit the shop. Okay, so this is equivalent to so many people just being inside, so people inside the shop, which results in them leaving. And this is equivalent, again, to the pressure of the blood being so high in the ventricle now, it causes them to contract and to eject that blood out. So I want you to remember that blood flows due to differences in pressure, okay? So it moves from a high pressure to a low pressure via valves, okay? It moves through those valves, okay? So please remember that. Okay, so this is a, oops, just wanted to move that back down. So this is a little animation to show you blood flowing through the heart. Okay, so it goes quite fast, so I'll play it for you a few times, don't worry. Okay, so what I want you to see is the blood emptying into the ventricles through those atria, and then they're ejected into their respective vessels. Okay, it goes quite quickly, but let's have a look at it again. Okay, so the blood comes into the atria. You can see valves opening, and then those ventricles become so full, they contract, and it forces blood up into the respective vessels, either via the pulmonary artery going to the lungs or to the aorta. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a quick look at some past paper questions. So the first question, the circulatory system contains arteries and veins. Describe how the structure of an artery is different from the structure of a vein. So the first thing I would do is I would look at the mark scheme. So you can see here that there's 2 marks for this question. So remember, 2 marks means you need to make at least 2 points. If it's 2 marks, you need to make at least 2 points in your answer. So if you've only made 1 point, then it's unlikely you're going to get the full marks for that question. So make sure you make the right number of points in order to get the most amount of marks. So this seems like a pretty straightforward question to me. Describe how the structure of an artery is different from the structure of a vein. We've definitely covered this. Okay, so think back. So the first thing that's immediately popping to my head is that arteries have, what do they have? They have thicker walls. They've got thicker walls or a thicker muscular layer compared to veins. Okay, so that's the first point. So arteries have thicker walls / a thicker muscular layer compared to veins. Okay, so we've made 1 point, we now need to make another point. So can you think, so I don't think it's sufficient enough to then just say the reverse of that. Veins have thinner walls and a thinner muscular layer. Like, that can't count as a second point because that's just the complete converse of what you've just said. So you wouldn't get a second point. So you need to think of something else that veins have, which is exclusive to veins, that arteries definitely don't have. And that is to do with valves. So veins have valves to prevent the backflow of blood, whereas arteries don't. Okay, so 2 marks. We've made 2 points, so I think don't waste any more time. Let's move on. Okay, so the next question. A comparison is made between blood taken from an artery in the leg and blood taken from vein. Sorry, what did I say? Yeah, sorry, I'll read that again. A comparison is made between blood taken from an artery in the leg and blood taken from a vein in the leg. Give 2 differences in the composition of the blood. Okay, so we've talked again about, aside from the structures and comparing the structures of arteries to veins, we've also talked about the differences in the blood that would be in the arteries and the veins. So remember, arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood. Okay, so arteries equals oxygenated blood and veins deoxygenated blood. But I don't think that that's sufficient because it mentions the word composition. So you've got to think what is in that oxygenated blood and what is in the deoxygenated blood. Okay, so the first thing to do is, I would say, arteries would have more oxygen in the blood than veins. Okay, that's the first point. Now, so again, like the first question, we can't then just say the reverse of that. So veins would have less oxygen in the blood than arteries. That's not making a different point. It's exactly the same point, just the converse. Okay, so again, you've got to think of something that would be exclusive to veins that you wouldn't find in arteries. So remember, veins are, veins return blood to the heart. And so it's being deoxygenated. So what else does it have in that deoxygenated blood? So remember I told you that the whole idea of blood is to act as an exchange. So you have blood that's being taken from the heart to the body where oxygen is given to the cells. But in exchange for that, they remove their waste, such as carbon dioxide. Okay, so veins return blood to the heart, which has waste. And what's the waste product? Carbon dioxide. So veins would have more CO2 in the blood than arteries. Okay, good. So I think we've done those two questions now. Let's have a look. Okay, so for part 1, it says, again, 2 marks, doesn't have valves and has a thicker wall or thicker layer of muscle. Did we say that? We said veins have valves to prevent the backflow of blood, whereas arteries don't. Good, we would get 1 mark for that. And we also said arteries have thicker walls or a thicker muscular layer compared to veins, so we would get the full 2 marks. Okay. Now the next point. So it says any two from this list. Okay, so the first point is artery has more oxygen, and I'm pretty sure we made that point. Yes, arteries would have more oxygen in the blood than veins. So we would definitely get 1 mark. If you scroll further down, so it refers to arteries in the answer here, but it says except converse for veins if veins is clearly stated. So you don't have to just write about arteries, you can also refer to veins in your answer, which is what we did. So we've said the converse of this sentence here. So we've said veins would have more carbon dioxide in the blood. So again, we would get, oops, when does that happen? We would get the full 2 marks. Yeah? Okay. Right, I've got 6 minutes left and I have so many questions in here. So again, I'm going to have to really cut down. So I'm actually going to leave that question. That's about transfusions. But if you guys want to have a go at it in your own time, you can. The mark scheme is available on these slides. Okay. So I'm going to do this question with you first. So this is a diagram of a heart, and you'll see in exam questions you always get you know, pictures of, you know, the heart in there, and you have to label it. So what it's asking us to do is to work out, using our knowledge of anatomy of the heart, to work out what the letters are referring to. So for part 1, it says which blood vessel, A, B or C, takes blood to the lungs. So remember, you can draw on this exam paper if you want. You can do whatever you like, just as long as you don't include it in your answer. Yeah. So you don't put it in the answer box, but you can draw outside on the question. So the first thing to do, which I would do, is I would just label the left side of the heart and the right side of the heart, just to make it clear. Okay, so you've divided it into left and right. Now it's asking which blood vessel takes blood to the lungs, and we know that the right side of the heart is what deals with the lungs. Okay, it takes blood to the lungs, but which is the vessel that would take blood to the lungs? Well, we know that it's the pulmonary arteries, and this one, which is clearly on the right side, does that. Okay, so the correct answer is B. And it says name parts D and E shown in figure 1. Okay, and we have looked at the chambers of the heart, and you should be able to work this out quite quickly. Remember, atria are always the smaller ones and are on top, and the first chamber that would receive blood, so D would be, so it's referring to the left side actually. So I would put left atrium. Okay, and E would obviously be left ventricle. Right, easy enough. Right, let's see what the mark scheme says. So we're on part B. So yeah, so part 1 is B. Again, 1 mark. And D and E. D is atrium and E is ventricle. It says ignore references to left or right, so you don't even need to be that specific and put left, but you would still get the mark because you put atrium and ventricle. Yeah, okay. Right, okay, last few minutes before we go for lunch. So this is a comparison between the different vessels. Now, again, this is all stuff that you should be comfortable with and you should know how to do. So where's that writing? Oh, that's annoying. Okay, so we're given the 3 blood vessels here, and it doesn't tell us which one is which. We need to work that out for ourselves. So it's asking us to work out which blood vessel is F. So instantly you should be able to tell, okay, it's got to be either artery or vein, because this one is just 1 cell thick, okay, and that's got to be the capillary. So capillary you can rule out as not being right, okay. So which type of blood vessel is F? What do you notice? You've got to compare them. So if you look at the muscle layer, you'll notice that this one is a lot thicker, okay? G is a lot thicker. And this one is a lot thinner. And also, the lumen of this one is bigger compared to that one. So instantly, just knowing those 2 things, making those 2 comparisons, you should be able to work out that F, because it has a thinner muscular layer, a larger lumen, it's got to be a vein, okay? And that is the correct answer.